Hi. I could do this for like half an hour and then we won't have any questions. All right. Cool. So yeah, this is called I never knew a website could hurt someone. I will describe all of my pictures so everybody can get the joy of seeing what's going on. Most of my slides are entirely pictures usually. So anyway, this is a hockey fight on the front slide of this. Lots of violence in my slides. Trigger warning. Okay, so the first thing I want to get to, and the thing that inspired this particular talk, is that accessibility is not just about blind people using screen readers. On the background of this slide is a picture of a bunch of alternate devices, alternate input devices, primarily for people who can't communicate well. Either they're nonverbal or at least effectively nonverbal. And one of the things that you see a lot about in web accessibility discussions is blind people, screen readers, blind people. How does this work on JAWS? How is this going to work if a person is not using it? They can't see the mouse pointer. But actually, statistically speaking, there are about twice as many people who are low vision than those who are blind. There are twice as many, again, people who are deaf and hard of hearing than are low vision. There are twice as many, again, people who are mobility impaired. And there are twice as many, again, people who are cognitively impaired. And if you look at all of the accessibility laws and standards that are out there, they have, generally speaking, a section that's aimed at what's called functional performance criteria. Section 508 has it, EN 301-549 has it, and it discusses those same six or so populations that I just mentioned. Low vision, blind, deaf and hard of hearing, mobility impaired, cognitively impaired, and speech impaired are going to be the six that you have. And yet what's not on there, what's not considered, is another population that I want to talk about, which is people with chronic pain. But let's go back to this not always people who are blind. This picture is of a number of devices, input devices, keyboards specifically for people who are low vision. They are high contrast. The predominant picture here is a high contrast keyboard, yellow keys with big black letters. You can even get those kind of things to overlay on top of your laptop. This is a MacBook Pro with a little silicon sheet that has those types of high contrast keys on it. This is again another device, input device for someone who again has a hard time speaking or communicating verbally. They can hit the buttons here. These buttons are they start with things, or they start with concepts, people, actions, things like that. There's a start button for I want, and then one next to it called I don't want, and then the next one called I need. And again, these are input devices that help people communicate who are nonverbal. This is something that a lot of you might have already seen in person. This is a projecting device where somebody can take a piece of print material and get it enlarged on a screen there. Very, very common in the workplace when you have an employee who's low vision. This is eye tracking. So this is for somebody who has, boy, this is a really old picture for any geeks here. This is, what is that, Windows XP? Anyway, so this is an eye tracking device. This is an old one. And as you can see, what happens is you'll set it up. It'll recognize the retinas. Are you trying to follow me with that camera? So anyway, this is, I'm sorry, should I stand still? It'll locate where your the centers of your retinas are, and once you're done setting it up, it'll allow you to navigate and use your computer using eye tracking. This is actually built into Windows now, and you can spend money on what's called a Tobii, which is an eye tracking device, and Windows will do it right now for you. This is a real size depiction of this device. No, it's a trackball. It's a monstrous trackball. Actually, in real life, it is about the size of a softball, maybe, for people with mobility impairments who lack the gross motor control for operating a trackball. Those two buttons there would be our left and our right mouse buttons. um, before I go too much further, I actually just talked to this guy, a good friend of mine, wrote a book called Digital Outcasts, in which his name is Kel Smith. You can Google, or I'm sorry, not go, you can go to Amazon, and this poor girl's, I'm stuttering up here and changing all my words, and she's got to keep up with it. Um, you can go to Amazon, type in Digital Outcasts, and read this book. It's an amazing book. It's a little on the dated side. He and I were just talking before this about some updates he wants to make. But it's the subtitle for it is Moving Technology Forward Without Leaving People Behind. And he's got a lot of really awesome stories about people who are disabled, who are, the challenges that they have with using technology, as well as wins for using technology for some of those people. It's a really, really great book. And we have this concept in accessibility, or in UX sometimes, where we regard the person who comes to our site or comes to our application as a user. We develop user personas and things like that to talk about them in the context of our site, right? And the inspiration for this talk was actually something that I experienced many, many years before I even got into accessibility. Before I got into accessibility, I was a web developer. I became director of web development for a company that did usability. And the first usability study I ever sat on was really, really interesting, because it solidified for me that the user is actually a person, that existed before their session, right? They existed before their session. They're going to continue to exist after our session. And we need to sort of start thinking about that when we think about things like user personas. And some of those disabilities are invisible. The background for this slide is actually a picture I took at Microsoft in Redmond, Washington, where they have these posters all over campus about accessibility. And the poster on this particular in this elevator it said 70% of disabilities are invisible. Some disabilities are invisible. And so what I saw at this particular usability study was the usability study that I sat in on was for an organization called the National Pain Foundation. And the National Pain Foundation, as you might assume, is an organization dealing with helping people who have chronic pain disorders. And what my job was at the usability company, at least in this instance, was to act as an observer, because I had come in as a web developer myself. I didn't have a lot of experience with usability and all that sort of stuff, and it was something I was obviously interested in. So I decided I was going to volunteer to act as a facilitator, or not a facilitator, I'm sorry, a note taker for these usability studies. So we would do the typical thing where you have a person at a desk and the facilitator, and then the mirrored glass on the other side, and I was the guy behind the mirrored glass taking notes about what was going on. And I thought it was just going to be, oh, person did this and person did that. What it was really was listening to all of these people complain. Usually, if anybody here ever heard of a Think Aloud protocol? It's fine if you didn't. So in the Think Aloud protocol for usability, basically you set up a couple of scenarios, right? Let's say it's an e-commerce store, and you say, well, I want you to find the black shoes on this site, and I want you to put them in your shopping cart. And then while you're doing that, I want you to tell me what you're doing and tell me how you feel about what you're doing. And so what happens is they're going to say, well, I'm going to go over here, and I guess I'll go to the search bar. I'm going to type in black shoes and so on and so forth. And I was kind of expecting that. I wasn't expecting all the participants from the National Pain Foundation thing to be really actually, for lack of a better word, bitching. Okay? About everything. Mostly because they had chronic pain, and that was a lot of what they were talking about. It was almost as if they had a captive audience with them, the facilitator, to talk about how managing their pain is a challenge, how getting people to understand that your pain could be really high one day and really low another day, or you can have bad months and great weeks or whatever. And it was really interesting to me because at the beginning of it, I thought, man, just talk about the website, please. And that was really, really interesting to me. Especially and then it dawned on me how horrible this website actually was, because a lot of the bitching was about that. But this picture is a picture I got from Creative Commons with the caption that we see on the screen. Is a woman staring into the computer, probably into her laptop's camera, where she looks very disheveled. She looks like she hasn't slept for a very long time. And the caption says, "You just pray that they believe that the tears in your swollen eyes are real." And then underneath that, pain's effects are not just physical. And this was the website that we were testing. As you could see, it was a Paragon, a beautiful design. And no, this is owing to the times it was. This was like 2006 or something like that. So it's got a 2006 design. My designs still don't look that good. But what was interesting about this, and this is the epicenter of the suckfest. That is why this website caused people pain. Because as you go around the circle and you see it says my pain, and then there's an icon for my treatment, and then my support, and then my commodity. And this is 2006 when flyout menus were the big thing, right? And so you'd hover over like my pain and a new menu would pop out. And then a new menu would pop out if you hover over one of those options, and so on and so forth. But the target area for these menus was really, really tiny. So if you happen to move, you guys are nodding your heads in acknowledgement because you remember those goddamn things, don't you? And as you hover over one, you barely hover out of it, and all of a sudden it disappears. And you got to go back to it, and you're just like, God damn it. Let me get it. Now imagine you're somebody with fibromyalgia, right? Who literally your existence is pain, and you're trying to deal with this stupid thing. And that's when I came up to the conclusion that websites actually can hurt people. Attempting to interact with a poorly designed and inaccessible website can actually hurt users. The people with chronic pain also have a lot of other things that sort of come along with chronic pain: lethargy, generally just physical weakness, either just because of the pain, and the pain gives you this lack of this desire to not expend too much effort, right? Or because you haven't slept very much. Mood disorders are extremely common in people who have chronic pain. Sleeplessness is a huge deal with people in chronic pain, and so is depression. The suicide rate among people who have chronic pain is really, really, really high. And also, sorry, I had one more bullet, impaired mental and physical performance. All right. So how can we help people? How can we make sure that our website is not painful? So the user is going to want to know a couple of things when they're trying to interact with a website. Where am I? What can I do here? How do I do that? And if I've made a mistake, how do I fix it? So a lot of designers and developers will meet the requirements for those first three, but then the last one, once I make a mistake, how do I fix it? They don't really quite get that one right, and that's a huge problem. This is a quote from a wiki from two guys named Cunningham and Cunningham. And I think it's like C2 or something like that. These guys, Cunningham and Cunningham, for anybody who might be interested in agile or in extreme programming, these guys are some of the pioneers of that. Ward Cunningham in particular was one of the big pioneers of it. And this quote I stole from them is on the principle of least astonishment. It has to do actually with object-oriented programming. And they're saying in this section of their website, they're saying that designing an object or writing a function should not be surprised when it does its thing. It shouldn't be surprising. Well, I've stolen that and I've co-opted it for a user experience quote, which says that the result of performing some operation should be obvious, consistent, and predictable. Okay. In other words, obvious always wins. By the way, this is one of my designs. Do not steal it. I know it's beautiful. Actually, so the behind the screens here, behind the picture on the background here is of a wireframe. I actually had to make this because I used to have the National Cancer Institute on there, but they've done a redesign. As you all in government know, as soon as a new person comes into the agency, they want to make the website all over again, and that happened underneath my feet at National Cancer Institute. But at National Cancer Institute, they obviously had like cancer.gov across the top, search bar at the top right, primary navigation, secondary navigation. And then they had this really cool thing where it was like a funnel. They would funnel you into content through a grid in the center section. And then you'd get into that, and then you'd get this left side navigation. So I had to, when they redesigned it, I had to reinvent the wheel. And so that's my example. But what we see in this example is, again, the statement obvious always wins. What's obvious on here? It's obvious where we can go to do a global search, right? It's also obvious where we are, which is we're in the product section. Underneath products, we are at the laptop section. And if we look on the other side, we see that we're on the 17-inch laptop Pro, whatever the heck that is. But you can see because of this, the stark visual difference between the active and inactive items, the pieces of the navigation where we currently are, and so on and so forth. In other words, you don't have to use this design. Please don't, because it's dog ugly. But you don't have to use this design. But if you are designing something, make it obvious. By volume, one of the most common problems in web accessibility is color contrast, because designers don't want that darn text effing up their beautiful design, right? So they'll make the contrast really bad. I say use bigger contrast, right? Use a bold blue as your primary colors or something like that. So again, on this thing, where am I? How did I get here? Where can I go now? That's all answered by this type of design. Anybody old enough to remember this picture? It's time to see a doctor for your mammogram or your prostate exam. So the title on the page says "What's Happening," and it's 3 characters from the 70s TV show "What's Happening." All right, so what's happening? So we want to tell them what is happening. If I had my computer, I could actually click on this. If I had my computer, actually, I could click on. Can I click? Can you guys click on this? Click it. Yes. Now click the preview. Yes, you're doing so good. I'm so proud of you. Okay, now click any column. The column header. Sorry. Click it again. Click it again. Click another one. All right, so what we're seeing in this is a sortable HTML table, and we're telling the user what's happening. And what's happening is that we are sorting the content, right? And we're sorting it, and as we do, we get a visual affordance that tells us what direction it's going in. And the table caption also says sorted by, whatever the column name is, and what the direction is. So in this case, it's saying sorted by email descending. If we click it again, yes, I love it. Teamwork, sorted ascending. Cool. Now go back to the slides. I don't know how we do that actually. Click the back button. Yeah. Hit the thing for the back. Hit the back. The back. Hit the back. Yeah, baby. Yeah, do that one. Okay, new tab. I don't even know how my own slides work, so I don't blame him. Okay, let's do it. We're going to click on something else in the next slide too. Okay, so tell them what happened. This is another huge deal for UX is to tell them what happened in terms of giving them feedback about whether they've succeeded or whether they've failed. Go ahead and click that. And please, again, don't steal my designs. This is a form. This represents, in my opinion, the gold standard for form validation, because what we have here, we have obviously that our form fields are marked as required. They're also programmatically marked as required, but we won't go into that stuff. Hit the submit button. And so now we've told them 3 errors are preventing successful submission of the form. And then underneath that is a list of 3 items. It's an HTML list, by the way, which will also announce as 3 items. We tell them exactly what the problems are, the last name, the state, the phone number. We also have a note next to each field telling them exactly what's wrong. And also you see underneath, for instance, underneath the last name field, it says next error. So in other words, we're allowing them to go into the next error without having to go through every field. Now, obviously, this form is rather simple, but imagine a loan application, right? If you've ever filled out a loan application online and, you know, forgot to put the dashes in your phone number or whatever, some stupid thing, and now it says, oh, we can't submit the app, and then you're like, well, shit, now what do I, sorry. I'm going to drop an F-bomb before we end this, I promise. You can, everybody's like, this is a professional environment, stop it. You got to hunt for the thing. Well, instead, we're just going to jump you to the right field. All right. Go back to that previous tab. Thank you. Don't steal my designs. Who had the big chuckle on that one? It's not that bad, is it? She was like, no, we are not stealing that design, sir. All right. In other words, be able to answer, what is this thing and what does it do? Hey, that didn't do that. What is this thing and what does it do? This is a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger in Kindergarten Cop. What is this thing and what does it do? Listen, when you're faced with dealing with accessibility, especially web accessibility, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, there's 78 of those things, right? And all 78 of those also are going to have, you know, if you read through the standards, sufficient techniques and failures and all that sort of stuff. And do not memorize all of that crap. Unless you want to be a consultant where you're doing audits all day, do not memorize all that crap. Memorize one thing. What is this thing and what does it do? Cognitively, your users are going to be asking that question whenever they get to your user interface. And for the most part, immediately seeing the UI is going to tell them what is this thing and what does it do. If I said there was a logo on the top left of a website and you clicked it, where would you go? The homepage, right? And if there is a search field on the top right, what is that going to do? Well, it's going to search the thing. If there's a row of words that have nothing to do with one another underneath that logo and search field, what's that? It's your primary navigation. What is this thing and what does it do? You're answering that all the time over and over because of your experience using the web. So going back to, you know, obvious always wins. What is this thing and what does it do? That's the only thing that your user is going to be concerned with. They're not going to be concerned with 78 success criteria. They're going to be concerned with, can I use this interface? Don't do super cutesy things like this. You might see this slide a lot in accessibility presentations, and people will tell you, oh, it's a good thing. This is called the stramp. The stramp is basically a series of steps, which also has a ramp in it. And so people are like, look at this. This is universal access. No, it's not. It's a horrible UX for everyone, right? So you're going to get an equivalent number of steps if you go in a straight line everywhere you go, but then that's going to be interrupted 3 times as you go through and have to go over this deadly wheelchair ramp. Because wheelchair ramps, if you've got our ADA coordinator there, 1 inch for every 12 inches of horizontal travel down. That looks more than that. And then the other thing is there's no railing next to it. So if your wheel happens to get a little over too much onto the side, depending on what side, you are going for a really bad fall. So the words on this is a quote from the Android developers' design principles. If it looks the same, it should act the same. The Stramp definitely doesn't do that. The iOS human interface guideline says consistency lets people transfer their knowledge and skills from one part of the app's UI to another, and from one app to another. A consistent app isn't a slavish copy of other apps, and it isn't stylistically stagnant. Rather, it pays attention to the standards and paradigms people are comfortable with and provides an internally consistent experience. That's from iOS human interface guideline. OS X says an OS X user automatically knows how to use such standard user interfaces, user interface elements, because they're smarter than Windows users. No, that's not what it says. Regardless of the app in which they appear. If you're a super nerd, Linux has a KDE user interface thing, and the central aim of KDE human interface guidelines is to create a consistent experience. It's so weird how all these people agree consistency is really, really important. In other words, ask yourself, what is this thing and what does it do? So in terms of what is this thing, what are the goals of the user? What are the goals of the business? And how would this UI element contribute to both goals, right? So when we're designing something, how does the UI element contribute to both goals? If it is not the best choice for whatever that goal is, make the best choice. I once had a customer, they're a time tracking company who's very, very popular, so I won't mention their name, Kronos, but they had this really cool, well thought out style guide where some things would have tabs, other things would launch dialogues. And in reality, what would happen is some things with tabs would launch dialogues that had tabs in them that would launch dialogues. And they said, Karl, how do we make this accessible? And I said, stop doing that. I said, well, actually, what I said to them was literally, is this the best choice for what you're trying to accomplish? Is this literally the best option out of all the other options that you have is to do this thing? Ostensibly, the tabs make sense and the dialogues make sense, but tabs with dialogues and dialogues with tabs don't make any sense. So let's do that. Well, there you go. So I forgot to click the thing, so it said what I just said. Okay, what does it do? So how does this control operate via the mouse? How does it operate via the keyboard? And how is focus managed to, through, and from this UI control? And what happens when the user acts upon the control? That's what you need to consider when we're considering what does it do. And so finally, I'll leave you with this picture I didn't take. The one I did take when I was there sucked, so I stole this one. Anybody know where this is? It's the Louvre in France. A guy named Tom Hanks went in there and stole painting. Never mind. So when I went, I was invited to speak in Paris in 2014, and obviously went and walked like 20,000 steps while I was there to see all the cool stuff. We went into the Louvre, and you walk in. Obviously, you're walking into the glass pyramid thing. You walk in there, and there's like security, which they're not showing there, but you know, your standard like airport security thing where they take your bag and all that sort of stuff. And then they have this thing, which is the stairwell, and it's a spiral staircase. But if you look really closely, right where the eye is, the dot for the eye is on the word design here, there's a flat area. And the flat area is the entrance to the elevator. That's that center thing in the middle of it is an elevator. And what I thought was really, really amazing is that when you, if you are walking down the stairs, have a friend or somebody with you who has a wheelchair, who's not going to go down the stairs unless they really have a weird sense of fun, they're going to go into this thing and they're going to go right next to you, literally right next to you. Not on the other side of the building or anything like that, not in the back door and down, some sort of service elevator or anything, right next to you. And then you come down, and you can't see this on the particular picture, but they come down right next to you on the thing. So I say good design is the convergence between creativity and capability. And that is me, Karl Groves. Is my contact information on there. Any questions? Fine, good. Yep, we got a question over there. Run.
Some of this is new to me, so I'm just curious about the eye tracker. Is that for mobility of the arms? Is it for deaf and hard of hearing? What is it for?
Eye tracking would be for someone who cannot operate a mouse or a trackpad or something like that. So mobility impairment primarily. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I think other questions.
I'm not gonna run. I'm not in the right shoes.
As a developer that's made modals that open to have tabs that create more modals, and I want to work away from that and get away from that.
Yeah.
Is there any resources for examples of good UI design for scenarios and stuff like that?
That's a great question. I would say, Rob, do you remember what Hayden's book is called? It might be Inclusive Components or something like that. A guy named Hayden Pickering wrote a book on inclusive components. And what's great about his book isn't just like how to develop the components, but also he describes the pattern itself, the interaction pattern itself, the use cases for it, and all that sort of stuff. And I think the book is called Inclusive Components. But is that it? Yeah. Got one over there.
That's okay. I was wondering, you know how a lot of schools are requiring like an intro to computer applications,
Uh-huh.
and they're not necessarily able to be completed independently. Are there computer application platforms that are accessible, or is it still more common that you have to do readers or an alternative assignment?
Oh, that's a good question that I don't have the answer to. If anybody else has anybody else in higher ed has an answer for that, find this lady. Yeah. Sorry. Any other questions?
Okay, so I think I have the answer to your book, Inclusive Design Patterns by Hayden Pickering.
There you go. Yeah.
The question that I get, and I loved the way that you framed how to do the design, but the question I get from my faculty, because I'm in higher ed, is what if I'm designing it for someone that's for accessibility reasons, and it becomes less accessible for someone who doesn't need the accessibility? Like
Right.
in the attempt to make it accessible, you're actually perhaps designing an overly engineered machine. How do you address that, or what do you think about that?
Can you guys put my slides back up? So that's why I use that as an example. The elevator in the loop. That's why I use that as an example, because I say that's a creativity problem. I don't believe in the myth that accessibility is going to render something less usable for someone else. If you and part of that is also because of the fact that when I do training, and I'm sure you guys have seen numbers around disability, right? And people will say there's 54 million people disabled in the United States. And then you take the numbers of people who are blind and low vision and blah, 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 and you end up with actually 75 million, 77 million, something like that. And it's because lots of people have multiple disabilities. And if we do design for one disability type, then yes, we are effing it up for a bunch of other people. So we do have to focus on a much more universally designed experience than that. Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions?
We've got a question in chat.
From Anonymous? Is it from Anonymous?
This is not from Anonymous. This is from Claire. And ask, I've been having trouble persuading people in our higher ed web team to do manual testing versus automated testing. Can you comment on the need for having actual people look at sites and products?
Ooh, yeah. So ultimately, whether something is accessible or not is whether real people can use it. That being said, there are a lot of things that we can do to test it ourselves, to make something, make sure we've verified that it's accessible. And some of that is automatic testing. But there are things that you just can't catch with automatic testing at all. And I'm saying this as somebody who made millions of dollars creating an automatic testing tool. And I'm telling you that there's still a lot of coverage that you're going to miss. So one of those things is going to be things like focus management and stuff like that. It's great that you would possibly be using Axe or Wave or whatever to do testing. None of those tools can test for focus management or anything like that. So there's got to be, what I would recommend is to have a robust testing methodology where we're using automatic testing for the things that it can find. And then the other things are going to be an intelligent manual test for the things that we can find. And then if we have the time and the budget and all that sort of stuff, test with real people. I know that in certain environments that we might not have the budget or the time or anything like that, but if you can find real people to test it, after you've fixed everything from the other types of testing, that's when you add people to the mix. Yeah. I think one of the people here had a question.
Okay. Hi, I'm Angel, and I also work in higher ed at Oklahoma State University. And so this is kind of a thank you and an add-on to hers. Thank you for using this example, because one of the things that I sometimes hear from faculty is, well, we've been doing it this way forever, and I've been using these same course materials for 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this example that you showed is so good because it's not building it into a new building. The Louvre is hundreds of years old. It's a historically important building that they have to be very careful about changing, and they don't want to change that, integral design to what that historical building is. But if someplace like the Louvre can do it, then we can change what we're doing in higher ed.
Yeah. And I love I love it when people say, well, we've been doing it this way forever. And it's like, yeah, my first car had a carburetor and an 8-track in it. We used to have slaves. Like, just because we used to do it a certain way doesn't mean we should continue. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi there, my name is Nate Wade, and I'm one of the web guys for the State Department of Health. And one of the most common challenges we face is that we've got a lot of pages, a lot of program areas, and we've got a lot of important information for people because it pertains to health.
Yeah.
And one of the most common challenges is, how do we get that information, excuse me, how do we get that information to people the best way without bloating the design, while still, of course, trying to maintain accessibility and also just making it usable, because we could give it to them, but they may not read it if we give them too much.
Yeah.
So basically my question is, what general user experience practices do you recommend for when you've got a situation like this where you've got a lot of information that you're trying to convey the best way possible?
Yeah, so a lot of that has to do with the way that we present the information. I would recommend taking a look at plainlanguage.gov for ways of organizing content so it's easier to read, easier to absorb. Because you're right, there's another whole presentation I could write. I could create a similar in nature to people with cognitive disabilities like dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, ADHD, all that sort of stuff, where, giving them an absolute mountain, like a wall of information is just not usable for those people. And so a lot of it has to do with content design. Plainlanguage.gov is my absolute favorite resource for that. There is another one in the UK that I'll try to dig up and then disseminate somehow. That's another plain language resource that's really great. Other questions? Yep.
Yeah, ask a question from chat to give the mic a chance to get over there.
Yeah.
So this one is from Anonymous, so.
Thank you, Anonymous. Thank you for joining us
Um,
again.
What types of manual testing have you seen with AT devices other than a screen reader?
Well, it's funny to think about that, mostly because a lot of the problems, the accessibility problems that you can find with manual testing are going to be manifested with a screen reader. However, with something like a Zoom text, which is screen magnification software, one of the things that you'll find is issues relating to focus management, where if something gets programmatic or something is supposed to get programmatic focus, but it only is visually displayed, what you'll see in Zoom text is that thing won't be brought into view. But there's other ways of testing that. The other thing, of course, is Dragon Naturally Speaking voice dictation software. You'll come to discover things that do not have the same accessible name as what's visually displayed. That's something that typically you'll be able to find in a robust automatic testing tool. But the tool that you want to use first, before you do anything else, the manual tool you want to use before you do anything else is your keyboard. Does keyboard focus go to everything that it should go to? That's number one. Does keyboard focus go to things it shouldn't go to? Does keyboard focus go to something that is not visible when it gets focus? And then does the keyboard interaction order make sense? And then the final one is, are there things does the focus order make sense? And finally, all of the controls, the things that we can click on, can we also use with the keyboard as well? So the keyboard is the number one manual tool that I would recommend for anyone.
If you have a visual representation of data, such as a chart, graph, that kind of thing, do you have any tips on making that accessible to people who cannot physically see it?
I have a whole presentation on that. I'll come back next year and give that. No, so there's a lot of things that we need to do to the data visualization itself. So utilizing higher contrast, making sure there's good white space in between the colored areas in the data viz, having good legends, indicating things with shapes or multiple shapes and things like that. So there's a lot of things to do with the data viz itself. Another thing that I tend to do sometimes, often really, is have a redundant table with the specific data. If that data updates frequently, then the other thing that you would want to do is provide the ability to almost have a video player type experience where you can stop the updates of the data, rewind the updates of the data, and fast forward just like a video player would. Those are some of the things that I would do. There's also really cool stuff happening in sonification of data. So imagine there's something really, really real time that we have to really understand, because the great thing about data visualization is the fact that we have an at a glance ability to understand what's going on with the data, whether it's raising or lowering or combining with other things. So there are people experimenting with sonification. Unfortunately, I don't know if there's a commercially available chart library out there that does that sort of stuff. But at minimum, like a table, a structured HTML table, as well as simplifying the data itself. So a lot of times we'll see multiple types of data going into this data viz, and the more simple we can get access to that, or maybe filter the data in a way that makes it simpler to deal with. Those are some of the things I would do. Yeah. Any other questions?
All right. We have one more in chat. This is Claire again asking, can you recommend a keyboard testing guide or website or resource to learn keyboard navigation? I've struggled with finding out how to do that.
Do you guys have one on the website? Okay, so webaim.org. By the way, I'll give them a plug if Rob's not going to do it, but webaim.org is an amazing organization. When I first started getting into accessibility, that's where I got all of my information. And they had at the time, and they probably still do, which is why I asked Rob, a bunch of things on how to do forms accessibly, how to do tables accessibly, how to do so on and so forth. And in this case, There's going to be a keyboard accessibility thing. There's also screen reader testing guide on there. Lots of other really good resources on webaim.org. Other questions?
Don't be shy.
Go ahead. Yeah. We got time.
Do you have any tips on helping make a satellite view or an aerial view of the ground more accessible?
Ooh. Well, yeah, no. I mean, so don't forget when we're dealing with something like that, that we do have to make things as accessible as we possibly can. Considering that it's primarily a visual medium, of course, you're not going to be able to make that part of it fully accessible, but there's going to be controls to zoom in, zoom out, pan, all that sort of stuff. I did a lot of work on things I can't mention, for DARPA that involve maps and things like that. And there was still stuff that we did to make all the bits and pieces accessible for navigating through it, as well as the pieces that are like indicating points on the map or indicating points on the landscape. All that sort of stuff can also still be accessible. And it's really just the same accessibility that you're already aware of, right? Which is making sure everything has good labels, making sure it's keyboard accessible and so on and so forth. And also focus management. So if you're able to click on something and then view that portion of the map, making sure focus goes to that. Is that it? Anything else? Well, I'm here all day, so if you have any other questions, just come and find me. I'm sitting in the back there. Thank you all very, very much for your attention and your excellent questions.
Another round of applause. Thanks.